Okay, so get this, our deep dive today.
Mm,
We're diving into a world built for pleasure, boundaries, and intrigue, the whole 9 yards.
sounds right up our alley.
Right. Our subject, Mistress Enigma. And before you jump to conclusions, she's not your, how do we put this, average fantasy figure.
Oh.
She's a dominatrix, but like designed specifically for this erotic role-playing game. It's wild. It all takes place in a place called the Mansion of Desires.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
And get this, we've got our hands on some really juicy stuff. Her character profile, the game's rule book, even descriptions of the mansion itself. Detailed stuff.
Wow. So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, I think the real question is like, how do you even design a character for such a specific experience?
Right.
It really makes you wonder what it says about us, when we create these elaborate fantasy worlds with control and, well, desires.
Absolutely. What I find captivating is how Mistress Enigma, even though she's this classic dominant archetype, she actually prioritizes things like consent and communication,
Yeah.
which, let's be honest, isn't something you typically associate with,
Yeah.
that whole scene. It challenges those stereotypes we often have.
It's like they flipped the script on us. Okay, so backstory time. Her real name, well, the name she was given was Isabella, born in Sweden, but it's the kicker, with this mix of Swedish and Brazilian heritage.
Interesting. Already adds a layer of complexity to her, doesn't it? And it begs the question, how much of her persona, her approach to dominance, is shaped by these different cultural influences? Something to think about.
Totally.
Yeah.
So getting into her personality profile, it describes her as intelligent, calculating, even a touch mysterious. Pretty standard dominatrix traits, you could say.
Sure, you could say that.
But then it gets really interesting. Like really interesting.
How so?
Instead of just power and control, which you might expect, her values are all about consent, clear communication, and like really tailoring experiences to each person. It's about understanding the psychology of her sub, creating a scene that caters to what they want.
Within limits, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Always within boundaries. But it's almost like she's an erotic therapist or something.
Guiding people through their desires in a safe space, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
And that's where this whole mansion of desires comes in. It's not just a setting, it's integral to how this whole game plays out.
Okay, so paint us a picture. What's this mansion like? Give us the grand tour.
All right, imagine this. A luxurious mansion, and I mean luxurious, designed specifically to heighten the senses. We're talking rooms dedicated to pleasure, a pool, a hot tub, a sauna even. They even have what they call an erotic chair. And while they're deliberately vague on specifics, you can bet it's designed for a certain kind of, shall we say, interaction.
Oh, that.
And then the props. Lingerie, masks, riding crops. Every detail is meticulously chosen to enhance that atmosphere.
It's like an adult playground.
Yes, carefully curated to ignite those fantasies and push boundaries.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really fascinating. It's a playground with rules.
Yeah.
Very specific rules.
Yeah, about those rules. I have to admit, seeing how much they emphasize consent and safety was a bit of a surprise. Not what I expected at all.
It's a total subversion of expectations. Like the game straight up says physical harm is off limits. Safe words aren't just suggested, they're mandatory. And they constantly use terms like DS, domination submission, emphasizing that this is about a negotiated power exchange, not something inherently dangerous or, God forbid, exploitative.
So it's less about actual pain and more about the psychological thrill of surrendering control. Safely.
You got it. It's all about exploring the edges of your comfort zone, but knowing you have that safety net, which actually I think is the perfect place for us to take a quick break.
Right on time.
We've met Mistress Enigma, toured her playground, and learned that it comes with a very, very specific rule book.
When we come back, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how those rules actually play out when you add other players to the mix.
So we're moving beyond, just the rules on paper. Right.
And into how actual people, characters, but with their own profiles and desires.
Their own, motivations and hang-ups and all of that.
Exactly. How they navigate this world that Mistress Enigma's created.
It's like, okay, you read the rule book.
Right.
But then you actually get in the game.
Precisely.
So who are these other players? Give me the rundown.
Okay, so first you have Laura. Think of her as Mistress Enigma's assistant.
Interesting.
The game describes her as beautiful, mysterious, someone who finds pleasure in submission and adoration, that sort of thing?
So she's living out a certain fantasy, right?
You could say that.
But it adds another layer to this whole power dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Because she's subservient to Mistress Enigma, but then...
But then she holds authority over the other players.
Yes. That's like a chain of command, but like a sexy chain of command. A chain of consent, really.
Right.
With Mistress Enigma at the top.
Right.
Then Lara, and then the other guests.
Guests, right. So even in this environment, this controlled environment,
Right.
you've got all these layers to the power dynamic. So who are these guests? What are they bringing to this whole negotiated playground?
Okay, we have Alexander and we have Dante.
Okay. Lay it on me.
Alexander, he's a fascinating one. He's that classic dominant type, wants to explore, wants to exert control, but also like really enjoys the sensual pleasure aspect.
Indulgent type.
Yes. And then you have Dante, who's all about seduction, a little lighter touch, more into the heightened sensory experiences like we were talking about before.
So very different desires.
Very.
Different approaches to navigating this world that Mistress Enigma built.
Mm.
Makes you wonder, though, how does she manage all these personalities?
Well, that's where her role as facilitator really comes into play.
Girl, I'm listening.
She's not just there to be dominant, right? She's created this space, this very specific space, so these personalities, these very specific personalities, can interact in a way that works for them.
Interesting. So it's like everybody gets what they want.
In a way, yes, but always within the rules. Always.
Right, of course, of course.
So it's like she's orchestrating this elaborate dance, making sure everyone hits their marks, gets to explore those desires without,
Without stepping on each other's toes.
Exactly.
Or worse.
Right, right.
And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting, at least to me from like a psychological standpoint, because even with consent, even with safety, you still have these inherent power imbalances at play.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Which opens up all these questions about how we, even in a fictional setting, how we navigate things like desire and control, vulnerability.
Totally. It really does make you wonder, are the people who created this game dealing with these questions in their real lives?
Right. And what about the people playing it?
It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves.
Exactly. That's what I love about these deep dives. It's not just analyzing a game for fun. It's about reflecting on our own desires, the ways we choose to or not to, explore them.
Because let's be real, who hasn't fantasized about surrendering control at some point? Or taking control?
Right. It's all part of the human experience.
All right, well, before we get too lost in our own explorations of power and desire, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're getting into the specifics of the game itself. So, reading all this, these profiles, the rules, it's like, I kind of want to play this game now, just to see how it all actually works.
Well, the creators did include a few specific scenarios, almost like scenes from a movie.
Oh, really? To give you a taste of how these interactions might go.
Exactly.
Okay, so what kind of scenarios are we talking about? Give me the highlights.
Well, one that jumps out is this pool scene. It plays on observation, anticipation, like Mistress Enigma is watching everyone from afar.
Oh, spice.
While Lara interacts with Alexander. It's all very deliberate.
So build that tension first, the slow burn.
Precisely. And then, as a contrast, you have the hot tub scene. Here, it's all about intimacy, those heightened senses.
Right, right. Set the mood.
Warm water, close proximity. It's all very charged.
And I bet that's where Dante, Mr. Sensual, makes his move on Mistress Enigma.
He does. And the game encourages that kind of exploration, Who takes charge, who yields, who pushes those boundaries, and who sets them.
It's like a dance, but with higher stakes.
A very carefully choreographed dance. And that's what makes this so fascinating, right? Because even with consent, even in this controlled setting, there are still power dynamics at play.
Oh, for sure. Speaking of pushing boundaries, we got to talk about this erotic chair situation. Things get pretty detailed.
Yes, they do.
And it's all about Mistress Enigma and Lara, right?
Yeah.
But Alexander and Dante are there too, watching and maybe even participating.
It's all optional, of course. And that's where the game's focus on consent is. Paramount, no means no, safe word, done.
Smart. So they've made consent part of the actual fantasy.
Exactly. It's not just a rule. It's woven into the whole experience. And that's what's so compelling about all this,
Yeah.
It's not just indulging fantasies. It's about exploring these really complex themes, desire, power, consent, in a space that's ultimately safe.
It really makes you think, though. Does playing a game like this, does it challenge how we see these things in real life? Or does it reinforce them?
It's a great question. One without an easy answer, maybe. But I think that's part of why Mistress Enigma and this Mansion of Desires, as fictional as they are, they give us so much to unpack.
They really do. And on that note, we'll leave you all to ponder that. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the source material we talked about and